Nobody had felt anything like this before. The earth would not stop shaking. The ocean receded as far as the eye could see, leaving boats sitting on sand miles away, and then just as quickly rushed back into town. Fear was everywhere as the violent, frothing, terrifying waters came rushing back towards the people. They fled to the highest hill around, the Cerro La Mesa. But the water wouldn't stop. It just kept coming. As the flood started to circle around their feet, they turned to their warlock. "Do something," they cried. "We're all going to die." And the warlock didn't hesitate. He grabbed an orphan and began cutting off his limbs one by one, his arms, his legs, his torso. Piece by piece, he threw the screaming boy's body into the oncoming flood, and just like that, it stopped. The people had been saved, all except for one. The 1960 Valdivia earthquake was the most powerful tremor ever recorded on Earth. It hit a 9.5 on the Richter scale. That's over 300 times more powerful than the 2010 earthquake that devastated Haiti. It triggered tsunamis that reached 25 meters tall and traveled tens of thousands of kilometers, killing thousands of unsuspecting people around the world. To those who experienced it firsthand, the memory will never go away. It was a trauma shared by an entire society. That society, however, was likely not the one that you'd expect. Despite the earthquake being named after the German-settled city of Valdivia, the history of indigenous rebellion in this area had meant that the region had remained relatively cut off from European influence. The people most affected by the earthquake were the Mapuche, the indigenous inhabitants of Araucania. For over 100 years, Araucania has been a land with two masters. Unlike in other parts of Chile, Spanish colonialism failed to completely dominate the Mapuche. While the region was eventually swallowed by the Chilean state in the late 1800s, the local indigenous people exhibit a form of self-determination rarely witnessed in the Americas. While their culture, governance, and sense of self have certainly taken a beating over the years, it's undeniable that they've remained staunchly protective of their historical identity. Right up to the modern day, this is a region that is noticeably proud to be Mapuche. And among the Mapuche, there's a history of sacrifice. You don't survive colonialism without spilling a great deal of blood. These are a people whose world has always been violent. Theirs is a land of volcanoes and earthquakes, of floods, tsunamis, and natural disasters of all types. In their society, the earth is still treated as a living being who needs to be sated and kept calm. For thousands of years, survival has meant living with a constant fear of the unknown, a need to control the uncontrollable. Like all societies who wish to understand and survive the world around them, they rewrote the landscape with legend. In modern Araucania, you can still see a witch when you're sick. You can still hear people complain that the wealthy made a deal with ghosts. The antisocial can curse an entire village. Legends die hard. In 1960, when the earthquake struck, there was little Chilean state presence around the Araucania region of Lake Buda. Laws had been handed down and generally understood, but indigenous culture had remained relatively stable. While everyone knew who the overlords were, they weren't exactly a concern of the day-to-day. Every once in a while, an authority figure wearing a fancy badge might show up and take someone away. Every few years, another young person might move to Santiago for work. But beyond that, they kept to themselves. Society, as everyone knew it, hovered invisibly between two worlds. When the earthquake struck, everyone knew that the Chileans were not coming to save the people of Lake Buda. This was something that they would have to take care of themselves. And while they'd all been through natural disasters before, this one was clearly different. To a people living in legend, an unprecedented problem called for an unprecedented solution. In 1960, human sacrifice was no longer a common practice of the Mapuche. It had long since lost its place in society. The warlocks of the region knew that certain actions would lead to arrest, and the fear of being hauled away by the state had effectively stamped out a number of historical cultural acts. But it didn't stop them entirely, it just forced them to adapt to the changes. For the most part, the belief system remained intact. Their goal was to keep their unique identity by finding a middle ground that fulfilled both sides. Instead of stopping the sacrifice in total, they changed the target from orphans to animals. In previous tsunamis, it wouldn't be uncommon to find a warlock carving apart a baby pig and throwing its limbs into the water. Since pigs generally don't have the rights of people, the state looked the other way. In time, it became normal. But there was nothing normal about the Valdivia earthquake. Everyone standing on that hill knew it. This was the biggest, most violent thing the Earth had ever done. If they were going to survive it, they had to do something drastic. They had to dig deep in their cultural history and do something they knew was wrong. At least, that Chile had told them was wrong. A warlock by the name of Juan Pañan came to a villager and told him that his grandchild, 5-year-old Jose Luis, was special. He was special because his mother had gone to Santiago for work, and that made him an orphan, the only one in town. Orphans were special to the Mapuche because they were historically the sacrificial lamb of the community. Not having parents made them expendable. Even though young Jose Luis didn't technically count, he was the closest thing they had. With the floodwaters rising up to the feet of the terrified villagers, it was him or nothing. And what could his grandfather say? The pressure of history, of culture, of fear, it weighed on him in a way that most of us will never understand. A warlock told him it would save them all. How can you defy that? So he acquiesced. Together, he and Juan Peñan brought his grandson before the rising flood and carved him to pieces. It was important to the ceremony that he not be killed first. Each piece of his body that was taken from a conscious, living child. Each piece would have been cast into the water in front of a cowering, terrified community. A screaming, thrashing, dying child in front of them all. There's nothing easy about sacrifice. They didn't choose this lightly. Everyone had to watch it happen. Everyone had to live with what they'd done to survive. As the waters subsided and the stake came for those who'd committed the crime, they listened to the words of the villagers and backed down. It wasn't because the boy didn't deserve justice or that they condoned these activities. It's that Chile understood the fear. They too had had to face the earthquake, only in their own way, but they'd felt the exact same terror felt by those on this hill. In that desperate moment, they saw the history and the culture of a people brought to the surface, and they backed down. Because those people on this hill that day had already been punished. They'd had to watch one of their own carved to pieces before their eyes. And I doubt a single one of them will ever forget it. This is Rare Earth.
What have we been through today?
I've cleaned my hand, but it's still filthy. We have been trapped at the bottom of a hill, completely full of mud, being made fun of by the local Mapuche, because they knew we were not going to get up that hill. But we got up that hill. I'm not going to say it was easy to get up the hill. I'm not going to say we didn't break the car in attempting to get up the hill, but we got up the hill. And
well
at the top
done.
of the hill. And look, we're having lunch like 3 hours late.